Episode 34, An Angry Nick. Anger was written all over Nick's face. He said, "Natalie, you betrayed me back then and I let it go. All these years, the person who has been there to support and accompany me is Cheryl. So if you even think about hurting her, don't blame me for getting mad. So you came all the way over here today to give me a warning?" There was ridicule in Natalie's eyes as she smirked coldly. Nick saw that smirk and realized that she was no longer the same person she had been. The Natalie he had known back then was never this cold and hard. Suddenly, he felt his heart ache. Nick took a deep breath and closed his eyes helplessly. He could only comfort himself by reminding himself that this was the woman who had betrayed him. She was no longer the Natalie he used to know. "Natalie," he went on, "all Cheryl does is speak well of you. Don't you realize that it was because of her that your father permitted you to return? When you slept with someone else and betrayed me, it was Cheryl that tried to cover up for you. It was so painful. I couldn't bear it. If Cheryl hadn't been there for me, I don't know what I would have done." Natalie felt even more bitter. Everything that had happened, it seemed, had been manipulated by Cheryl. And now the tables were turned, and suddenly it was her fault? She really had to applaud Cheryl's skillful scheming. Perhaps a fool like Nick would actually believe Cheryl. Natalie couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him. She said, "Are you done talking? If so, please leave. You're not welcome here." Natalie thought, "There's nothing left to explain. And anyway, since it happened a long time ago, and it was now far in the past, there was no point explaining it." She moved to go past Nick, taking out her keys to open the door. But Nick was angered by Natalie's attitude. He blocked her way and said condescendingly, "Natalie, after all those years you spent abroad, I thought you'd changed. But no, you're still the same selfish person that thinks only about herself. Why was I even with you back then? I was really blind." This last remark riled Natalie. He was really pushing their already delicate relationship to a point where they would be worse than strangers. Losing her patience, Natalie snorted. "I see that you haven't changed either after all these years. You're still a brainwashed fool. Now get lost. I don't even want to look at you." She quickly pushed Liam in front of her and approached the door. Nick banged his fist on the door in anger, refusing to let Natalie go in. "Natalie, you were the one that did the shameful thing. You let me down. And now you're acting like you were wrongly accused? You really are despicable." Nick saw her expression change, and he felt better after giving vent to what he'd kept locked inside him all these years. He said, "You're lucky. Cheryl still thinks about you and was able to find someone to be with you. Otherwise, who would want to be with you? A single mother with a kid like that?" Furious, Natalie shouted, "You ass! Get the hell out of here!" She pushed Nick away from the door, opened it, and went inside with Liam, slamming the door shut behind her. She was afraid that if Nick didn't leave, she wouldn't be able to keep her composure and would break down. After all was said and done, he was still a man whom she had loved deeply long back. But Nick was still outside the door, refusing to move. He called out, "Natalie, let me give you a word of advice, yeah? You should accept the arrangement. Otherwise, when the time comes, the Davidsons will use any means they have to force you to accept it. I'd like to see how much better off you'd be." "Get lost!" Natalie shouted through the door. After a long while, Nick left, and it was finally quiet outside. Natalie was able to relax at last and leaned against the door, her face sad. Nick had completely ruined her good mood. She knew now that the Davidsons wouldn't let go of this arrangement. She had to think of a way around it. She couldn't let them get hold of Liam again and use him to threaten her. Liam, watching from the shadows, could see how worried she was. He blurted out, "Mommy, Daddy is really amazing. Why don't you let him protect us? Let Daddy protect us." An image of Bryce's arrogant face appeared in her mind. It was true that Bryce could protect them, but why would such a capable and powerful man want to be with a single mom with a child? Natalie pulled Liam over and hugged him. Patiently, she said, "Liam, don't talk such nonsense. That person is not your dad, so we can't bother him anymore or annoy him." Liam nodded reluctantly. He looked at his mom with wide eyes, wanting to speak, but kept his thoughts to himself. But Natalie only saw Liam nod. Unaware of what he was really thinking, she felt relieved. "Come on," she said, "let's get cleaned up," and headed for the bathroom. Liam finished his shower quickly and went to his bedroom. Natalie was very tired after the stressful day, so she decided to have a nap herself after she finished taking her shower. Liam lay on his bed but couldn't fall asleep. He kept thinking about the incident this evening when Nick had come to cause trouble at their home. Feeling panicky and desperate with fear, he decided that there was no option but to use his mom's phone to secretly call Bryce. Bryce had arrived home earlier after Samuel dropped him off. As soon as Bryce stepped through the door, he heard his parents talking about him in the living room. His mother was talking as he walked into the living room. "Bryce's marriage is top priority." "Oh, Bryce, you're back. Your father and I were just talking about how your grandparents have found a few delightful women for you to meet this weekend. We hope you can take the time to meet them." Bryce, taking off his jacket, paused. He sighed helplessly at his mother's words, but didn't say anything. He had gotten used to Michelle's methods of persuasion a long time ago. He had respected his mother from a very young age, but whenever she brought up the marriage issue, he would always find an excuse or change the topic so as to avoid the conversation. Today, Bryce was particularly reluctant to discuss the subject. "I've been very busy lately, Mom. Perhaps some other weekend." Then Bryce suddenly had a thought. It didn't matter whom he married, just as long as he was married. That meant he could marry anyone he wanted. Natalie's image suddenly appeared in his mind. When Michelle saw her son wasn't a bit interested in talking about the matter, she thought about trying to persuade him, but Bryce's phone suddenly rang, interrupting them. Bryce saw the caller ID and frowned. Natalie's number. The moment he thought of her, she called him. What a coincidence. Bryce wasn't really sure that he wanted to answer Natalie's call, but almost without realizing it, he automatically pressed the answer button.